That's smart. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning. Wrap up your conversations and we're going to get started. If you're sitting on the side or in the back, feel free to come up front. We have plenty of seats up front, or even in the back if you're still want to be in the back. We have plenty of seats if you need them up here. So good morning. My name is Beach Pace. I am a city councilor in the beautiful city of Hillsboro. Thank you to my fan club from Hillsboro in the back. For those of you who are wondering, my name is Beach Pace. It's a person, not a lifestyle. But it's up to you if you want to make it that. So welcome to this morning's breakout session of Housing Development, Thinking Outside the Box. I would now like to introduce, and please raise your hand when I say your name, introduce Kim Travis. Kim is a housing integrator at Oregon Housing and Community Services. Yep. And what we can do is, I'm prior military, and so some people get a lot of claps, and then some people get one clap, and the person who gets the one clap feels really, it's not a great way to start off a panel discussion. So what I'd like to do is when I say their name, you just give one clap, right? So Bill Smith. There you go. Okay. So let's start again. Kim Travis. There you go. Good job, Kim. We also have Gus Chachos, owner and developer at GCT Land Management. Next name, here we go. Amy Fraley, right, affordable housing coordinator of the beautiful city of Bend. We also have Dana Schultz, permanent supportive housing program manager at OHCS. Thank you all to the panelists for being here. I appreciate it. I'd also like to introduce Ariel Nelson. Good job, who will be the moderator for today's panel, and she's an LOC lobbyist. Thank you all for learning the military way of clapping. Thanks to all of you for being here today to learn about housing, and I'll turn it over to Ariel. Thank you. One clap, yeah.
Thank you, Counselor. Good morning, everyone. As the Counselor said, I'm Ariel Nelson. I'm your LOC lobbyist for housing and land use issues. Before we launch into today's panel, I just wanted to give you a little overview of where we're going. We're going to hear from a couple of panelists about two different types of developments, both using OHCS, Oregon Housing and Community Services, affordable housing resources. Different resources, different ways, what it looks like in different communities. So really pleased to introduce our first panelist, and we will break for Q&A after our first panelist, and then we'll move on to the second portion, and then we'll take questions at the end as well. So please welcome Gus Chachos, GCT Land Management. Thanks, Gus.
All right, well, thank you. Very excited to be a part of what Oregon's doing in the housing realm, and just anxious to be able to collaborate with partners I have up here. Looking forward to learning, and I hope you'll all be able to take some interesting concepts and innovation back to your communities. So what I'm hoping to do is give a brief overview of what we're doing in Eastern Oregon with our veterans villages. I don't really want to focus too much on the niceties of our projects. I really want to have you guys be able to see the components of what we're doing and maybe be able to benefit your local communities that way. So I'd like to just start by saying we are excited to be partnering with Oregon Housing Community Services with our projects. It's been, I guess partnerships would be the buzzword for what I think is probably the biggest catalyst in the project's success. We've got two projects underway. One is operational, it's in La Grande, and I'll be showing you that slide shortly, but the concept is very easily replicable, and so that's really what I'm excited to see maybe be the biggest takeaway today, is that this model, this tiny home or cottage home model, is something that's not new but is easily replicable. So our three projects, again, our first one is a 10-unit, one bedroom, 480 square foot cottage home in La Grande. Our second one is in Baker City, and it is 12 units. Let me back up and say LeGrand is on 0.83 acres. So I think that's been an unusual statistic for folks to wrap their brain around. The one in Baker City is a little bit larger, about 2 acres. And each of these projects have a community building where we're trying to leverage the also important wraparound services component. Recognize that in LeGrand we didn't do as good of a job as we hoped to with that facet of the project. And as we move forward with Baker and even our third project, which is proposed in Ontario, we're leveraging the footprint and the kind of the wraparound services component to just be a substantially larger and more comprehensive. Realizing we're giving folks the tenants the skills and the abilities that some of them need to function well in that environment. And we've seen that in our first project where some of the folks that have been a tenant there need that assistance. And so we're just really excited to explain how this works. Again, we've been able to leverage the partnerships with Housing Authority as they manage this first property. And so as I move into the next slide, I want to make sure that I just keep driving home the fact that the partnerships are the key. Okay, on this slide, my hope is that not necessarily that you can see all the details, but the slide on the bottom right is what the project looked like. I should say the property looked like before we purchased it. Just a regular, almost an acre piece in the city limits, kind of cluttered, a little bit overdeveloped, if you will. A lot of buildings maybe that shouldn't be there. The second photo on that slide is what the project looked like after we got the permits and started developing it. You can see a couple foundations already dug on that slide, and then the top photo is just a rendering of what the project looks like today. And it actually looks very close to that. And what I wanted to hopefully take away from this slide is that there's a lot of opportunities in our communities I think we're missing by not kind of looking through the trees, if you will, and being able to see potential. This property was for sale quite a while on LeGrand, and I think there are properties like this in all of our communities, especially rural communities, I think. But being able to recognize that as we face this challenge of housing, being able to find places that work well, maybe not necessarily wrapped up with a bow on them, but look like something like I've displayed here, they have the potential to actually function very well. And I want to stop for a second before I move on to the next slide and say that I know everybody here is involved, or I suspect is involved in government in some capacity, city, county. And that was just a huge part of getting, I think, recognition for the validity of our projects. I know one of our county commissioners was super helpful, just was very vocal about how the veteran need in our community was critical, and then folks started to listen. And so I think that's important to recognize. We need if you're going to get projects like this in your communities, especially rural and very rural, having you all be a part of kind of being instrumental in that is critical. I just often think about, is it, what is going to draw a development like this to a community, especially a rural community in this industry where developers can go and work anywhere. There's work everywhere. So why would a developer want to come to a rural Eastern Oregon town or a rural Western Oregon town? And so I think you all have a big part in that, and I hope that maybe that will be something you can take back. Okay, next slide. I call this my feel-good photo. It's our first cottage. It's our first project, and our first walls stood up. And these two gentlemen are veterans that work for our company at GCT Land Management. And I just thought it was great because they've been employed and they're actually building cottages for veterans. And so I just thought it was kind of a happy photo. It does have some relevance. I wanted to illustrate the fact that because we're primarily focused in rural Oregon, I think recognizing that you can take a couple guys like this that don't have all the skills in the world to go work on, say, high-rise apartment buildings, but they do have skills to work on this style of development. And in rural America, in rural Oregon, these guys exist, and that workforce that's so hard to come by exists in your community. And so it was great to be able to use that workforce. And so I think just recognizing that these small footprint homes, they're 24 by 20, and they're just a square structure that's easily replicable. And so I just wanted to make sure that we recognize that it's something that's easily accomplished in rural. One thing I didn't mention is that we've focused, or I should say we've emphasized our projects being permanent. So we want to, I've recognized there a need for all types of housing, right? We've got these temporary, we've got transitional, we've got a variety of different needs. We're really trying to focus on our developments being a forever home for a veteran. And what I found is they've taken to this style of living wonderfully, and I just can't say enough about how happy and just almost content that they are living in an environment like this. So, and as well for the communities, we recognized as we went into LeGrand and we went into Baker, there was quite a large amount of pushback against our projects. In fact, the first meeting we had with the city council, the room was literally packed, and there was people out the back of the room. And I just going to venture to say the majority of them were not in favor of it, because I would say as many as could get up and speak did get up and speak, and none of them really wanted to say we don't want it because it's a veteran and it's like, how dare you, except that flavor came across. So what we've done is we've made a purposeful effort to make these projects fantastic. And we've kind of taken the extra step to make sure that they blend well in the communities, and that they're permanent, meaning they're gonna be there for a long time. We've tried to implement strategies that don't make them stand out, but kind of make them blend in and really complement the community and the neighborhood. And I'll move on to the next slide. All right, this is just a real-time view of our first project in LeGrand. I wanted to just illustrate the simplicity of it, and it's a month or two before we went operational. But you can just get a feel for what they look like. It's all in a square, kind of all facing each other. But I think this really kind of just speaks to how simple it is. There's nothing new to this. But I really feel like that the small footprint living works for a variety of demographics. So it's working really well for the veterans, just because having that small footprint seems to be something they desire, and all just being close in to one another, and kind of it resembles, I think, where a lot of experiences they've had. And I want to focus a little bit more as we move forward on how I think you all can be proactive as you go back and figure out how to be innovative in your communities. I think one of the things that stands out to me is just being willing to think outside the box, like our presenter has put on the primary slide here, and being able to look at opportunities in your community. And then as you find opportunity in your community, being able to partner and just pull people in that are in your community that you might recognize. Say as a city planner, you might know somebody that has a propensity to build or develop, and just taking that step towards at least bringing up the concept of, hey, what do you think about this? As a developer, I've really appreciated our city planner in LeGrand, Mike Boquist. He's done a fantastic job of just sitting down and helping me. This first project, we had a piece of graph paper in front of us, and still today. In fact, last week I walked up into City Hall, knocked on his door, and he said, "Hey, Gus, come on in." And I just can't tell you how refreshing that is, because I've worked in other cities where I can't get a phone call back from the city manager or the city planner, and so I'm not sure what side of the fence everybody sits on that, but I know it disrupts production, but I think in the big picture, you know, it's also, there's a productivity that goes along with that. I think continuing on with the concept of partnering, the Energy Trust of Oregon is one of our partners that has just been a fantastic partner in that they've shown us a lot of intricacies that we, being in rural Oregon, might necessarily have been privy to. And so it's been fantastic to have them come over, model our homes, give us scores, give us guidance. And they sent me some slides. I chose this one because I really liked resiliency as kind of the tagline here. And let me just read a couple sentences there. It says, the ability of a building structure and its component parts to withstand current and future climatic conditions, and they gave wildfire, brush fire, extreme wind, flooding, heat stress, etc., which minimizes the loss of functionality and recovery time. So I just thought that as we all are trying to figure out how do we tackle this housing crisis, we don't need to belabor that we have a housing crisis. We just need to figure out how we can all come together and accomplish fighting back. And I think resiliency, everybody has an opportunity to choose that. Do we want to get beat down by the oppressiveness or of the lack of workforce, the bottlenecks, how much 2x4s are, all that stuff? I just think it's really important that we just keep moving forward. And one other thing that I think ties in with that, one of my associates, she helped me write the grant for LeGrand, and is the first time that I've ever really been exposed to someone that's tenacious. And I know that if you ask yourself, am I tenacious? We're going to say no, right? At least I would. But I got to see that, and so what I recognize is she got things done, and it was just a real eye-opener for me. So that's one of the challenges, I guess, that I have today is step towards tenacity, right? Don't try. We're likely not going to achieve it, but let's for sure try, because we've got a tall mountain to climb. And I like the fact that if you just try to work together with your builder or your developer or whatever it may be, there's opportunities that come out of that. So last slide here, I think ties into resiliency. From the previous slide, what I guess is important about this is as we kind of end fire season, and we know that fire season has become just a huge issue in the West, and particularly Oregon. My company has also been involved in wildfire for over 25 years. We have a contract with the government, and we do fuel reduction and structure protection and all kinds of different things. And it's given me an insight to going in and trying to save homes that are in wildfire's way. And so it kind of instigated this thought of building a cottage that has super fire resiliency that communities could implement into their build back, or even if as you continue to build into the urban interface. I think that using some of these strategies it would be important for Oregon to consider, as well as we do enter into that interface environment, being wise about how we can present our developments that aren't just inherently in harm's way. Bend, I noticed driving through it, there's a lot of building in the interface. In fact, I think Bend is the interface. And so it's great to see, but I think there's a lot of wisdom in trying to figure out how to be innovative and not putting ourselves in harm's way. So that's what I have today for you. I'd like to answer questions if you have any, and I appreciate your.
All right, thank you guys. Before I'm gonna come around with this mic so that folks can hear questions, but I'm gonna throw you a question to answer while I'm walking, which is, you mentioned some really great partnerships that you had with OHCS, Energy Trust, and I think you mentioned the Housing Authority, and so I'm just curious, did you go out and seek those out? How did you know that these were the right partners for your project? How do you put those together?
I think the demand for housing is so incredible right now that for the first time in my career of being involved in the housing industry, people were coming to me with the concept of how can we do this? The VSO, Veteran Service Officer in La Grande, called me one day and said, would you be willing to come and visit with me? Have an idea I want to run across you. And that's really how this whole veterans thing started. But I think as he came and we started talking, he walked me through a lot of the, I think I can say red tape at OHCS. And I started talking with folks in that world, and it just seemed like once I got into that level of communicating with those folks, it just led me into the housing authority directors, the county commissioners. I've had several county commissioners call me, and it just seemed like it started to spawn that response.
My question is about ownership. You said these were forever homes, permanent homes for veterans. Do they have home ownership? Are they renters? Is it like a manufactured home court where they own the structure but not the land? Can you speak to that?
Sure. Our model is private ownership. We do have our partner in the projects that we have established so far has a minority ownership by the Housing Authority. So, and that's been a fantastic partnership because it's a wonderful kind of liaison to the funder who has a trusted ally in place, right? And they actually are the property manager, so we know that it's done well. I think if there's a limiting factor in that, it's us, and just trying to figure out how we can kind of come alongside the agencies and do it well. We did try to apply for funding for a home ownership project for veterans. Realized that we're still trying to figure out how to make that work best. We are working on that still. These first three projects are privately held. The veterans rent them, and they go through the HUD VASH program typically.
I have a question. I'd like to ask you to put on your hat as if you were a city official or a city administrator. How can you contrast, how would you contrast the difference between one of these projects and a normal commercial project that might appear on the same site? What differences would the city have to offer in order to make one or the other a better commercial environment?
So are you referring to this being a commercial application for that property? I'm not quite following your question.
How does this differ from a normal commercial project? Are you asking the city to do something special, something different?
I see. Possibly. Our city has what is called a cottage home ordinance. They've allowed for infill in higher density than typically would be allowed in most cities. This project, prior to that cottage home ordinance creation, I think in about 2020, this property would have been suited for only 3 dwellings. After they passed that, we now could put 10 plus the one that existed there. I'm not sure that's really answering your question or not, but we could have done an apartment building there as well under that same, but I just felt like this style of development fit the neighborhood well. And I didn't realize it, but I think the individual living space is very important to the clientele that we're dealing with right here.
I guess I'm confused. I got the impression this is about affordable housing, and I don't understand. How is this affordable housing?
So we go through the HUD VASH program. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. So HUD handles all the intricacies of the tenants. So they qualify the tenants. We don't have anything to do with that. They tell the tenant has to qualify for what level of rent they will pay. And so they will go through that program, and then HUD will pay the landowner, which is us, the entity that owns it. They'll pay the same rate. It's just how much will they subsidy. So we can't charge we can't charge market rate. We're given a rate that we have to charge. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Steve Calloway from Hillsborough. Are these units on the tax rolls, or since they are also, I guess, partially owned by government, are they off the tax rolls?
They're off the tax rolls.
Okay, to follow up with that, they're off the tax rolls. It's a private ownership, right? So you bought, right? And then you have HUD does the management, correct? So it's deed restricted? Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah.
And since it's kind of a nonprofit, it does not pay taxes. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so that's
the housing authority being an owner. I think is
well,
how
makes
that's
it-
structured.
okay. And I'm assuming it was never said, but the community building is where the bathrooms and the kitchen and all that is. So the homes do not have. What do they have in them? Do they have any sort of infrastructure, water? sewer,
Yeah, I'm
anything?
sorry I didn't do a good job of that. The homes are basically just a miniature stick-built home. So they have a washer and dryer, walk-in shower, their own heat system. Actually, fantastic kitchens. We've done a higher level job than I think we need to, because we're committed to a 60-year term with Oregon Housing for these.
So, Mayor Alex Johnson, II from Albany, Oregon. My question is revolving around SDCs. Is that forgiven by the city, waived by the city, or is that picked up by OHCS? How do you handle system development charges?
LeGrand didn't necessarily have that. They had connection fees. I think each community is different in that respect. So we had to obviously pay sewer water connection fees. That was our responsibility. The city did contribute, which I thought was just a fantastic support of the project because the requirement was for us to have to pave the entire block that we faced. And since we're on a corner, we had to pave quite a substantial area, and that paving had to go to the main street, which was another block away. So the city just contributed half of that. We had to pay for the asphalt; they did the actual paving. So, and really, that was it. There was no concession by the city other than that.
Gus, what was the cost per unit in LeGrand? Do you know that?
I don't think I can tell you that off the top of my head. It's higher. It's higher than normal when you look at the project as a whole. But if you think about what the cost is to build a unit, because the footprint is so small, it compensates for the fact that you can build multi-housing units less expensively. So I don't have an actual number on the top of my head for what each one cost. I want to say around $190 a square foot, but I'd have to look that back up.
Yeah, Bill Meyer, Councilor, City of Florence. I'm curious about the clientele you serve. Do you have a local preference? And the reason I'm asking this, housing is an issue on the West Coast. And in this day and age with the internet, an affordable unit coming on the market is going to be visible to the entire West Coast. Again, do you seek out local preference for the clientele you serve, or is HUD going to handle that filtering process for you? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The tenants are vetted, no pun intended, but they're vetted through the housing authority, and it seems like locally they go through their local veteran service officer, and then he recommends them to the housing authority, and then the housing authority makes sure that they're prepared to actually be an applicant.
Hi, Katie Dunsmuir from Estacada. I was wondering if your project includes any wraparound services or if this is just limited to the housing side of it.
Yeah, thank you. We do have some MOUs in place for wraparound services for LeGrand. Again, this was our very first crack at this type of a development. We've recognized that a lot of the times the MOUs that have that commitment in place don't necessarily have a lot of teeth in place, and so we've noticed that some of the services that we thought we would be able to just call up and have be available aren't. But as we move forward, we're trying to we're recognizing how important that wraparound services is. In our first project in LeGrand, we do have one of the local housing authority folks that come by regularly 2 or 3 times a week, and they meet with the veterans, and that's been great. We're really hoping as we move forward to have that be substantially more comprehensive. So we're recognizing how important it is.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on to the second portion. And if there's time at the end, we can ask more questions of Gus's projects. Our next presenter is Amy Fraley from the City of Bend. And she's going to talk about another type of affordable housing resource for permanent supportive housing. She's going to speak specifically to a development underway in Bend. And just so you know, for questions purposes, I think we're going to hold until we'll have Bend-specific questions, and then OHCS will go more into depth about how permanent supportive housing works and where else in the state this is happening. So I just want to give you that preview. So take it away, Amy. Thank you.
Good morning. Is this on? Yes, there we go. I'm Amy Fraley with the City of Bend. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and talk a little bit about Cleveland Commons, which is our permanent supportive housing units and development that we are hoping to bring online in 2024. So here we have an early drawing. Cleveland Commons is a development of 33 new apartments in the city, which will include a broad spectrum of services to help serve chronically homeless individuals or households in the region. It's a 3-story building. It will have 24 studio apartments and 9 one-bedroom units, along with more than 3,000 square feet of community space and office space for those wraparound services that were just brought up. It is centrally located. It's about a block off the 3rd Street corridor or 97, and it'll be within walking distance of our public transportation system, groceries, pharmacy, and other amenities. This has been a truly collaborative process with Oregon Housing and Community Services, providing more than $8 million to get this project moving. There's also a $2 million commitment of ARPA funds from Deschutes County, and then $700,000 from the City of Bend in the form of an affordable housing fund loan. We are looking right now for an owner-operator. What I will say about these projects, and Eric King, I see, came into the room as well, is there are bumps in the road. And so for all of our practical planning purposes, we will continue to have these types of glitches. And so those partnerships and moving on and being creative is really important. So if anybody in the room knows anyone, we would love a building operator to come on board as soon as possible. The current funding available for each unit through Oregon Health Plan or the Oregon Health Authority is $330,000 per year or $10,000 per unit in supportive services, and there is a 10-year commitment. And then, of course, we'll be working with other community partners to provide wraparound and services for operations. If you notice here, the meeting started in 2017, and we're hoping to bring it online for folks in 2024. The real push came from the medical community and their identification of frequent users of systems and what we needed as far as resources. And then Eric King, our city manager, began gathering people together to have conversations and to problem solve. Not only to identify barriers, but to identify ways to work around those. And it did take a full community effort. It resulted in the formation of something we call the Fuse Board, which is the Frequent User System Engagement Organization, and they continue to help lead and coordinate the project. So the roles that cities can continue to play is to bring people together to problem solve, identify needs. and ways to get around those. I will recognize that Neighbor Impact, one of the nonprofits in our area, donated the land and formed an organization with Housing Works to continue to move the project forward. It's called Housing Impact LLC. The total cost of the program is just over $10 million, and that $8 million from Oregon Housing was instrumental. So you can kind of see the timeline here. Got the site prep, and right as Cleveland Common was selected, we found out about the operator shifting. So we are hoping to have an MOU in place next month.
All right, thank you, Amy. Next, we're gonna introduce. I'd like to introduce. They're separated, but we have Dana Schultz, the Permanent Supportive Housing Program Manager at OHCS, and I also just want to acknowledge Kim Travis is a housing integrator at OHCS. She is probably a key resource for local governments, for cities, in kind of understanding or being aware of what are the resources available at OHCS and these potential partnerships. And she can kind of help you, lead you down that path that Gus described when he was putting together his project. So Dana's going to go more into depth about what permanent supportive housing is at a very basic level. We're talking about the capital to build the housing, funding for rent assistance to make them permanently affordable, and then the wraparound supportive services. So there's much more that goes into it than that. She'll explain it, and also what the program at OHCS is looking like, how that's developing, what the future opportunities are to bring this type of housing to your communities. So thank you, Dana.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dana Schultz. I'm the PSH Program Manager at OHCS. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the PSH program. And so the project Cleveland Commons that you just heard about was one of the first projects to go down what I call the PSH path. So they formed a team. They realized they wanted PSH, and I'll go into what that is in a moment, in their communities. They galvanized their leadership, their resources. They went through what's called a Supportive Housing Institute, and they were able to apply for funding. And so OHCS has been able to provide the project-based rental assistance for that project, the supportive services funding, and then that development capital, that $8 million. So we're very excited to be involved with Cleveland Commons. Okay, so I'm going to skip through some slides a bit just for the sake of time to get through the real meat of it. So like I said, I'm from OHCS. Just real quick, we're the State Housing Finance Agency. So we get resources from the legislature, from the federal government, and we drive them to local communities around Oregon. There we go. And we have kind of three main buckets of what we do. We have our housing stabilization section that's more homeless services and those in-housing resources like energy costs and weatherization programs. And then the PSH program is in what's called our affordable rental housing division, where we're focused on developing housing, and then our home ownership program. All right, so what is PSH? We keep saying it. So permanent supportive housing is what we at the state think permanent supportive housing is housing that is, one, deeply affordable to households living on extremely low income. So that's 30% AMI or below. More often than not, it's folks with no income at all. Second, the big one, it's permanent. So folks living in PSH need to be signing leases just as they would in any other market rate. There's no programmatic timeframes. You can't say, hey, you have to wrap this up in 2 years. Households can live there for as long as they need. And what really makes PSH is that on-site comprehensive tenancy support services that's provided. And these services need to be absolutely voluntary. Folks need to be able to choose to engage in those services without the threat of losing their housing. PSH also is prioritized for the folks who are most vulnerable and who are living outside. So at OHCS, we require that projects using our PSH funding serve chronically homeless households, just like Cleveland Commons. So that's households with long-term homelessness and generally the presence of a disability and pretty complex needs. And lastly, PSH is rooted in what's called the Housing First model. There's lots of layers to Housing First, but in a nutshell, it's exactly how it sounds. Housing comes first. It's the first requirement, no questions asked. And once someone's housed safely, that's when you talk about, okay, let's talk about getting sober. Let's talk about accessing mental health services. And if a person doesn't choose to go that route, their housing is not threatened. Okay. Just real quick, kind of what happens in PSH. This is just more intensive programming than you would see in other supportive housing. It's not one resident services coordinator per 100 households. We want to see about staffing about 1 to 15. And usually you see staff models that have case managers, peer support specialists. Really successful programs bring in healthcare focused positions like healthcare navigators. If you're a Medicaid billing entity, you can see therapists or clinical social workers actually operating on site. And then traditional health workers and community health workers are often a big part of some PSH programs. I've listed out a big slew of all the services that can happen on PSH. And really the magic happens like in between when providers are getting really creative and focused on specific tenant needs, things you might not think of. I think we just approved a project to buy a turntable for a resident because it was going to soothe their mental health needs. And that's where we want that's what we want our funding to do, is to get creative about keeping people stable and happy and healthy in their new housing. Okay, so Oregon has really jumped into PSH. This is a new program. We've put a lot of resources into it. The legislature is fully behind us. And we are excited to drive PSH across communities in Oregon. We believe in this model, and this is why. So the first is that, PSH is a critical component in the housing continuum in your community. So when I say continuum, I'm talking about, the housing options that you have in place to meet people where they're at when they're experiencing homelessness. So that could be emergency shelters, sometimes transitional housing, but then you need those permanent housing options for people to go to, or we're not going to move the needle on chronic homelessness. And so PSH is one of those permanent housing options. It's the one for folks who really need that long-term support, that deep affordability that doesn't go away. PSH is that response. And so the chart up on the screen, just making sure it's there, that came from our statewide housing plan. It was data that was pulled from our partners, Corporation for Supportive Housing, around Oregon's need for PSH. And these numbers have probably gone up. And you can see that basically in all the systems within our state, there are people who require PSH as the intervention they need for stable and supportive housing. So it really does touch on all the systems that we're working with. The next one is it significantly reduces costs on our social systems, on our public systems, especially in the healthcare realm. So there's been lots of studies, mostly in the metro Portland area, but also nationwide through our partners, Corporation for Supportive Housing, that really shows that people living in PSH, the costs surrounding them around utilization of emergency systems goes down. So there was one in Portland that looked at a PSH property, and healthcare costs for those individuals went down about 14%. I think primary care utilization went up 20%, and emergency room utilization went down 18%. And so that obviously translates to nightly costs. So on the other image here is a snapshot of what it costs to house folks who are interacting with these emergency systems pretty frequently. Obviously, a night at the state hospital, very expensive. A night in the ER, very expensive. A night in county jail, also pretty expensive. And then permanent supportive housing is significantly more affordable, if you will, but it's also way more trauma informed. They're living in their home. This isn't a negative experience. So it's affordable and better for the people there. And lastly, PSH is a proven model. So PSH came from HUD in their continuum of care funding realm. So it's been around for years nationwide. And so PSH has been happening. And so there's data to look at. When you look at PSH outcomes, you see high retention rates. You see folks staying in housing for 12 months or more. I'm talking like 95% retention rates. You also see folks who do exit the housing, exit to permanent housing. They're going to tenant-based vouchers and just needing that rental assistance, no longer needing the services. They're getting their own apartments in market rate units, or maybe they're moving to another program. But exits to homelessness are actually very low. And we see reported improvements of quality of life from the residents who live in PSH, which is, of course, the most important, and increased utilization of those services and healthcare programs that we just talked about. I'm going to skip over this history, but the slide is here if you need it. But since about 2018, we said, hey, PSH is important. We want to see it all around Oregon, and we've gotten significant financial resources from the legislature in the last few years. Okay, so like I said, Cleveland Commons kind of went down our PSH path. So I kind of just want to walk you through the resources that we have and how, if PSH is something that you've identified as a need in your community or you're thinking about it, how to engage with this process that like Cleveland Commons did. So first, our program, what do we offer? So we're trying to build physical PSH. So we offer that PSH development capital through various, we call them NOFAs. So when we release different funding through our different programs, you can access capital through those different NOFAs. And then we also offer that long-term project-based rental assistance. So that's making these units deeply affordable. We subsidize those units. Tenants pay 27% of their income, and we pay the rest, going up to a 60% AMI rent amount based on your county. And then the long-term services funding. So that $10,000 per unit per year, every year, to make sure that you have a fully fleshed out program for your PSH. And the last piece is our technical assistance capacity building component. It's called the Oregon Supportive Housing Institute. I'll go into that in one moment, but that is basically how we support communities and the teams who are trying to generate PSH in their areas. We help them plan that out, figure out what they need to do, and then drive them to the resources that are going to make it a reality. Just real quick, we do require that programs serve chronically homeless households. We let your community make that definition officially, but we want this funding to serve people who have been living outside for a long time and have pretty complex needs and disabilities and are seen as the most vulnerable in your area. Okay. All right, so the Oregon Supportive Housing Institute. This is the cornerstone for our funding. To actually be eligible for the PSH specific application, you have to have gone through this institute. Your team has had to gone through this process. You can also apply through our other applications, and if you're awarded, we just make you go to the institute afterwards, so you can't get out of it. But it's a great process because you form a team, and Cleveland Commons was amazing and because they had county representation, city representation, and then we've also seen that in other teams, they bringing in different players. We require a developer, we require a service provider, we require a property manager, and we ask for someone with lived experience to be on the team. But that doesn't mean you can't bring in other players. City leadership, your local health clinics, or your CCO absolutely can be involved in these teams. And if you're accepted into the Institute, you go through a 5-month cohort where you're working with our partners, Corporation Supportive Housing, who are just national best practice teachers of PSH and other supportive housing models. And they work with you to, one, train on the best practices and quality standards, and also workshop your project specifically. So at the end of the Institute, you have a more fully fleshed out plan. You have a plan on how you're gonna get your resources, and you have a lot of deliverables ready to go for your application for funding. on this map is where we've had teams come from for the Institute. So we've had 27 teams complete the Institute. You can see a big chunk in the metro area, but we also had a team from Ontario, we've had teams from Southern Oregon, Central Oregon, and teams along the coast. We actually had 2 projects from Astoria in the last Institute, and 1 just got funded, so that's exciting. And so this last slide is the projects that we have funded. So these teams have gone through the Institute, and they have successfully found their funding through OHCS for development capital, and either from OHCS or leveraged from a local resource, project-based rental assistance, and that long-term services funding. As you can see, the projects kind of are from all over. And I want to say that they're all very different, and they're all structured very different. So our program definitely allows for you to get creative and build the project that's going to work for your community. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, absolutely not. There's quality standards, but it's what's going to work for who's living in your community, what resources you have, and what's your capacity. So Cleveland Commons, 100% PSH units. That's a huge lift, but they've got the commitment and they've got the resources. But there's some projects on this list that maybe only 15% of their units are PSH. So they're going small, and that's great because they're doing what they can, but they're still making that path for PSH, and we welcome that in through this process. So yeah, everything's very different, and within these projects, the partnerships are very different. Some have housing authorities leading the way. Some have like nonprofit service providers or community action agencies leading the way. Some have their county behavioral health system leading the way. So partners are coming from all over, and it really just, you gotta patch it together to make it work for your community, but we welcome the creativity that you can bring to this. So yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you, Dana. I'm going to come around with the mic for questions in the audience, and I'll throw one out to you to start. So you mentioned that to be part of the Institute, you have to have a developer, a property manager, some key partners in there. What if you're a city and you want this type of housing, but you maybe don't know where to find a developer or one of these key partners? Where would you start?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as the PSH program manager, I can definitely field all those types of questions. I know I've talked to Gust about PSH capacities in his region, so you can reach out to me with those general questions. But to find specific partners, I definitely recommend reaching out to your housing authority. Your housing authority has a lot of resources and an understanding of development. And then also find out who is your continuum of care, that homelessness services realm. They might not have developers on site, but they sure have service providers involved to understand that route. So there's different avenues. You can always reach out to OHCS, though, to kind of direct you in the right way.
Hi, Gamal Nasser, Mr. G, out of Lebanon, City Councilor. And my question is, have you run across this, and how do you deal with it? That's the question. The explanation is, I heard wraparound services and identifying a need, kind of two-part. Where I come from, wraparound services, that term does not exist. Case management exists because case management company is the company, the organization that takes the information and identifies the need and then refers out to specific organizations that actually provide and are expert in those services. Now I'm hearing wraparound services in this area, in this part of town, and they're doing the same thing, but they're not providing the services. One case in point is basically a property management company that found the developer, built the homes, and they're fantastic. And they do the putting the people in the homes, right? But they also do the wraparound services, is what they're calling it, and case managing out that client to the respective organizations that do that. The problem is, I'm in insurance, that's my day job. When I go to find insurance for them, wraparound services isn't even something that they can find. So what is wraparound services? And I have to explain it to them. And then when I get to my old terminology, which is, well, they just do the case management. They're basically an office. They don't do anything except bring all the services together, maybe in one location. maybe in terms of all the documentation, and then they refer out to other locations, right? So my question is have you run across, first of all, the insurance issues to provide the insurance for these facilities, whether it's the low-income home, the organization that's calling itself, we do wraparound services, but they don't actually provide the direct service, or maybe they have a location where all these people come, and then they got to get involved with everybody else's insurance. And then is it really a service agency that's involved in, because one service agency can't do all that. It's almost impossible. I've been in social services for over 30 years, and you can't find one agency that does everything. But you can find one agency that provides case management, that provides access to services by working with all the other organizations and agencies and letting everybody be their own expert, right? So how do you manage that? How do you run, what are the things that you've run across, and how have you dealt with those type of issues?
Okay, that's a complex question. I think so. I get your point about the wraparound services. I think you're right, especially in rural areas. There's probably not an agency who has the capacity to provide mental health, physical health, absolutely. And I think when we say, or when I say wraparound services, especially in those smaller communities, having that main organization be the case manager and is critical and totally acceptable as long as they're establishing partnerships, formal partnerships with the providers who can do the other things that create a wraparound service in itself. They don't all have to be provided on site. And I know in the Portland metro area that might be more feasible. And we do allow for our funding to pay multiple service providers. I have buildings who have up to 3 service providers being formal partners in the property, have office space in the building, and have a commitment to delivering services, and they all complement each other. If that's not possible in the area, it's totally fine to have one central case manager, but having those MOUs set up with, say, a health clinic or a behavioral health partner or a culturally specific provider is totally acceptable from our perspective and works just as well. Insurance, that high insurance rates, absolutely for PSH. We're working with PSH partners now to how to build out their development budget to cover those costs. And we're also working on kind of emergency funds to basically appease insurance agencies about the large costs that come from PSH. And then our operations dollars do pay for services insurance. You can fund those within our services program. We pay for those operations and administrative costs in terms of programming.
Great. We have time for one more question. Councilor Martin.
Hello, I have a question about the permanent supportive housing dollars, the $10,000. So kind of question to both OHCS and the Bend staffer. You said $10,000 per unit. How long does that $10,000 per unit funding stream, how long is that guaranteed? And then to Bend, is $10,000 enough? Is there more investment that's required per unit to be able to provide the necessary services?
Well, so OHCS signs 15-year term contracts for that services funding with the eligibility for renewal with the intent to last the entire affordability period of the project, so at least 30 years. That funding is baked into our current service level budget with the state legislature. So it is renewed biennially, but it's not. We don't have to defend it every biennium. So we feel good about it lasting long term, and we intend for it to be matched up to the project as long as it's operating PSH. And just to preempt Amy's answer, I don't think $10,000 is enough.
$10,000 is not enough. So, but I'm pleased to hear that it's longer than the city believed. We thought it was a 10-year commitment. So we will continue to not lobby, but we will continue to encourage other partnerships and find creative ways to help support permanent supportive housing and the commitment by the state and our other partners to make it work. And we know we're working at a deficit, but that's part of the leadership opportunity within cities is to pull those other resources together and move forward for projects like this.
Great, thank you. We don't have any more time for questions. I'm very sorry, but you can find the panelists afterwards. So, ladies and gentlemen and non-binaries, can we please have a big round of applause for our panelists? So I am standing in a very precarious situation. I am standing between you and lunch. So it's time for lunch. So please join everyone else downstairs. Join all the conference attendees downstairs in the trade show room for the networking lunch. And thank you for joining this morning, and enjoy your rest of the day here at the 97th League of Oregon Cities Annual Conference. Thank you very much.